legislators who were in the parliamentary building when this address was being made by the president. The 6,782-word document, just over an hour to deliver. And in this panel, I have Rarieda Member of Parliament, that is Otiende Amolo, as well as the Senate Majority Leader Kipchumba Murkomen, and he's been called the junior senator. I don't know why by Murkomen, but yes, Mutula Kilonzo Jr., the senator for Makueni. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. I'll start with initial reactions to that speech. What stood out for you, Otiende?
Well, I think the speech was largely balanced. There are a few areas that could have been covered but were not covered. There are one or two areas which I probably do not agree with the approach that the president gave it. But it should be understood, one, that the State of the Nation address, what it is to cover is already stipulated in the Constitution, Article 132, which draws you to Article 10. So there's a sense of repetition that Kenyans must be used to.
Okay.
What will always vary is the depth, detail, and format of it. Secondly, I think it stood out in the sense that the president tried to balance between those who have criticized him in certain areas, including corruption, in terms of the approach, and giving the assurances of continuity in the war of corruption, in support of the BBI initiative, and similar matters. So I think it was more or less balanced.
All right, and it touched on some of the things you've been very vocal on, Murkomen. What was your take on this?
First of all, I think just to agree with Tiende is that people must, I see many people trying to fault the president for repeating certain things, because State of the Nation address is a repetition of what you've said for the whole year. It's an account of what has been happening in the country, the current state of affairs in the country, sum total of what has been happening in that particular year. And for me, I think President's speech was fantastic. What I liked most about his presentation is that, you know, a head of state is not just, is not supposed to just lead the country in terms of what needs to do, but to inspire that nation.
All right.
Now, recently, there's been a lot of conversation as though if you looked at our newspapers, media houses, every conversation has been very negative to the extent that everybody thinks that this country is going to the dogs. But the president has said, one, this country is held in terms of security. He's talked about infrastructure, the number of accounted for a number of roads. He talked about our country being the leading country in the region, in the continent actually, and almost the top 6 countries in the world that uses green energy. You know, 85% of our energy is from green energy.
Yes.
So if you look at the president, he is taking Kenyans back to what is really supposed to be discussion about the issues, how much the economy is growing, unemployment-related issues,
yes,
food security-related issues, so that although we have a fight, and he concluded with it, that we are saying we want to fight corruption, we want to build the country to unite, Kenyans must not forget that there are many other integral issues that are expected of government,
right,
and that government must account for what has been doing. And that's why in our new constitutional dispensation, now 6-7 years down the line, new government, you know, 7 years, but the constitution is about 9 years.
Okay.
We have an opportunity to every year account for everything that is necessary for this country to be held.
And you've said we've been negative, that is the media, in terms of the coverage and the headlining stories. But even in his speech, he did term corruption, which he saved for last, as the corruption jigger. So it is bad. And kama ni mbaya ni mbaya. Over to just the initial reactions.
Okay.
I just need to get something also from Mutula Kilonzo. A fantastic speech in your view?
Well, I'm beginning to wonder myself whether or not we don't have either too much expectation, or we are not sure what we wanted from the speech itself. But first, I think the president attempted in a very clever way to balance the political situation in Kenya. So the state of the nation included the political situation. Those who were seated inside like me, people were thumping their feet depending on which side of the speech they liked. But I'm beginning to wonder, if you look at the framework of Article 132, that the president has 1 day in a year to come to Parliament, whether in fact we ought as Parliament to start defining what he should report on.
Okay.
Because in 1 hour, I'm not quite sure, personally, whether the president has reported the state of the nation.
All right.
Whether the public have understood what the status of the nation is. Because you might have 6.3 growth, but how does that translate to the common man? For the economists, that sounds very good. For the gurus who sit on treasury,
Okay.
those sort of things, you know, they make good writings. But what is it meant to be? How is it supposed to address that person who tomorrow morning, when they wake up and have a discussion
Yes.
in a small place in Tomboya Street, what are they supposed to be discussing other than they were waiting for somebody to be thrown out of office or something like that?
Yes.
I think that the State of the Nation address must, by and large, address all those aspects that Otienda Molo is talking about in Article 10. If we need the president to take a break and speak for 3 hours, he should. But I think all those items,
Yes.
all those items must have a page, because it is required that you will give a report,
Right.
and the details will come in the Kenya Gazette.
So in your view, was it a fail or it wasn't exhaustive?
It wasn't exhaustive.
Okay.
It wasn't exhaustive for purposes of that every person, every other Kenyan was watching him. The details, even if they come through the Kenya Gazette, most of them will never get to see the details.
And some of the things,
that is what bothers me.
some of the things that you feel are not exhaustive or not addressed, you could bring up in this conversation. But first, just reaction to something you brought up, and you said this is envisioned in the Constitution, it's provided for. It's actually the issue of repetition shouldn't be brought up. That question of how exhaustive it can be, can that be addressed, can that be changed, or it's what we have and that's what we take?
Yes, it's an interesting matter and sometimes a delicate
Yes.
one. Because first, as Senator Mutula Kilonzo Jr. is saying, we in the House are a microcosm of what's out there. The divisions out there are as alive in the House as they are out there. And so there's almost a sense in which the president also has to try and walk a line in which it does not appear that a section of parliament is either booing him, which is not quite allowed because we must listen in silence, or appears not to appreciate. So there's a sense in which I think the president tries not to say things that would be so fundamental, in that house, things that he might otherwise say outside the house.
Right.
So I kind of sympathize with that. But having said that, the idea of the president coming to address parliament, he's not just addressing members of parliament.
All right.
He's addressing the nation through parliament, because there's no forum where he can get all the Kenyans to address them. And so, to that extent, Senator Mutula Kilonzo is right in the sense that every Kenyan wants to see or hear their issues. But Kenyans have so many issues that even if you took 1 week, you will never be able to address them. So
Right.
that must also be balanced. But two,
Yes.
there's also a sense in which Kenyans wanted blood. They wanted to see blood.
Heads to roll as well.
They wanted heads to roll. In fact, the president himself acknowledged it. But part of that is because he himself set that pace. In 2015,
All right.
in an address to parliament, he actually set the heads to roll.
Right.
So people kind of got to expect that when you hear the president, heads can roll. And so I kind of understand that.
Yes.
Yes.
And he went into something or alluded into something that if a state officer is actually charged, then that means they would be asked to step aside. Perhaps there's some undertones, and because you're all legal minds, you'll help us get into that. Because there's actually a governor who is in an active case right now, and there are questions around it. You brought it up in Senate yesterday, Mr. Mutula. We will be addressing that in terms of the void that is in law to address such issues if a whole governor is facing charges, and if he's expected to step aside, what that means for the county. We'll be back with that and much more. There's a handshake, then there's a corruption that was given a good amount of time in terms of the issues that he addressed, as well as the Big Four. But many asking, he didn't quite talk about the food security or insecurity that we're facing at the moment. So we'll look into that when we get matter of the handshake, that we are not turning back, the words of the president, on uniting the country. We have chosen the hard road of building unity and cohesion against the easy road of division. We are greater people for it. Let me put this to one of the panelists who spoke, or at least made his thoughts known about this issue. On March 9th, Bona Murkomen, you tweeted out and you say, handshake in capital letters is the worst political fraud ever witnessed in this country. It's being used as a scheme to fight one individual together with the charade called Fight Against Corruption. It's a shame. Do you still stand by those words?
Yes, I stand by those very serious words. First of all, let me start by saying that the president spoke today very well on a theme that is called no turning back. No turning back to, so many things. I think if you were to put a heading to the speech, it would be called no turning back, because he talked about no turning back on matters corruption, on matters of uniting the country, on devolution and so forth.
That is true. Now, on this matter
so
on
it
handshake,
wasn't on just one that issue.
yes. Why you refer to it as the worst political
number
fraud
two is that, as I have argued before, the president has the greatest intention for the nation insofar as uniting this country. And that intention is represented by his words and commitment, not only to Jubilee leadership, but also to the opposition led by Honorable Raila Odinga. Unfortunately, the reality on the ground is that it's become a political fraud. And I have 4 things to say about it. Number one is that since the handshake took place, we've been told at the highest level of ODM by none other than Deputy Party Leader, Honorable Governor of Mombasa, Ali Joho,
yes,
that the former Prime Minister told them they can only deal with the president but must attack the deputy president. Those words were uttered publicly, yes, in Busia. Number 2 is that Honorable Aisha Jumwa has been punished to the highest level, presided over by the former Prime Minister, for our association with the deputy president. Our only crime was to work and associate with the deputy president. Number 3 is that in every public function, number 3 first is that you can see that ODM is sponsoring and planning to sponsor impeachment, not at a very low level, at the level of the leader of minority in the Senate, in the person of James Orengo. And when James Orengo speaks, who has spoken, not just that they share the same county with the former Prime Minister, but also that he is his closest confidant. And the last thing is that if you see in all public engagements, one side of the partnership, and I can't blame Mutula here. Mutula is innocent and clean, and his side is innocent. There's only one political party, the ODM, which is led by the former Prime Minister, which has consistently worked to fight Deputy President and to tell us that this building initiative is just to deal with one individual. Now, for it to show clearly to the country that our friends in the ODM have never appreciated this important factor of uniting the country, if you see what the president said today, he said the handshake was not about him and the former Prime Minister alone. He said it must cascade to many millions of Kenyans.
Okay.
Now, the fraud here is that on one hand, the one side of the handshake, which is the president, believes that it's about uniting the country. The other side, which is the former Prime Minister and his team, believes it's about dividing the country.
All right, let's give a chance to Raria, the Member of Parliament. First, you say Mutula is not innocent on this matter. Otiende, respond to this. And you have actually 4 points.
I do not understand to mean that I'm guilty.
Yes, go ahead. You have 4 points equally to respond.
I've not said anything. I've not committed any crime.
Innocent,
but
yes.
First, I like the fact that the president spoke so strongly about the BBI initiative and repeated it and said there's no going back. And also, the fact that the president acknowledged the problem of corruption, and we'll talk about it shortly. I think Senator Murkomen is living a lie on this matter, unfortunately. You cannot be the leader of majority in the Senate when by happenstance, the majority in the Senate are also the party that is in leadership of the executive and therefore the country.
Yes.
When the president, who is the leader, therefore, of that party comes to a joint sitting and tells the nation that I stand by BBI and there's no going back, and then you come and criticize that, it means you're actually criticizing the leader of your party. It means that either you have lost trust in that leadership, in which case you should either ask them to resign or you resign, or it means you do not believe in that. First of all, you cannot talk about the Building Bridges initiative without talking about the president. Why? One, the Gazette notice that creates the team is signed only by one person, the President of the Republic. It is not signed by Raila Amolo Odinga. Two, the address to Parliament is made only by one person, the President, not the Right Honorable Prime Minister. So where the Raila comes in this question, when your question is very clear on BBI and what the President said, I don't understand. Right. I think it's scapegoating. Right. It is also important to understand that you don't bring all these other issues. Issues of BBI are very clear. The team has not spoken on anything. When Senator Rengo spoke about the views in terms of impeachment, first he said, and he made it very clear in an interview, that those were his views. They were not Raila Amolo Odinga's views. Secondly, he was speaking of an intention. No motion has been brought on impeachment. Thirdly, he was not speaking for the BBI team. Yes. So unless you have something that is under the table that you're not able to bring to the table to attack the BBI team, I don't see where the correlation with Orengo, with Raila comes in, because we must await the report. And even the president today said that he's eagerly awaiting the report of the BBI team. Comment on it. I, for one, is awaiting that report, because I think a lot of the conversation should start once we receive it. Yeah. Right. Unless one fears that in that report there might be things that are unpalatable. Okay. Well, I don't know.
I think
quick response and then Mutula. Yes.
I think Atiende chose to answer his own question. We were not discussing the Building Bridges initiative in terms of the committee that is collecting views. That is neither here nor there. It's actually being chaired by my colleagues in the Senate, and yes, we have no doubt why we should second guess them. We are talking about handshake as a concept, and you can see Atiende Omola has not controverted any of my statements. He has not actually disagreed with any of the things I raised, that their party leadership at the top believes that on one side of the political divide, we should be talking to the president but attacking the deputy president. And I say that is a fraud, political fraud. And I stand by it, and I'll stand by it until the day, Mr. Masai, this country, Kalonzo Musyoka, Musila, wrote in a book that we went to with Mutula when he was launching, our former colleague David Musila, talked about the biggest problem of this country is political deceit and political betrayal. Political deceit in the sense that you have people who, on the face of it, they have come to the fore, ostensibly, to perpetuate unity of the country. Okay. But on the other hand, they have no intentions in their actions and behaviors that they want to unite the country. Let me tell you something. I have said it here, and I will repeat. President Uhuru Kenyatta means every sentence he has said about uniting this country. And why do I believe that he means it? Because since he held hands with the deputy president in 2013, 2012, before the elections, they have done things that are visible. They have dealt with the issue of post-election violence and reparations and addressing concerns.
And you don't believe the sincerity of the partner in this particular handshake?
They dealt with the issue of squatters that are supposed to be resettled. They have united this country. President Uhuru Kenyatta was building on a foundation that they started with the deputy president to extend to the opposition, work together. Unfortunately, his partners have come with a lot of deceit, and I stand by it.
And they're not sincere in your view. Yeah. Well, do you ascribe to that view that it is being used, this whole issue, to fight one individual, this whole scheme, to fight one individual?
No, I personally think that the handshake is misunderstood. Whether it's misunderstood deliberately from the position of the president and the former prime minister is another question altogether. I also think that part of the problem is that there exists extreme mistrust in the Jubilee coalition, that even if it wasn't Raila, they will still be complaining about somebody, a third party in the bedroom or something. The point is that it had the concept of what it was supposed to achieve has not quite percolated well. First amongst the political leadership, two amongst even the team itself. I've said this before, that the team that is doing the BBI is working very quietly. For some strange reason, they want to operate off radar.
Okay.
if you're going to build bridges, you can't build bridges in the country as if you're walking in the dark, like the way we are doing this interview in the dark. You can't do that. Otherwise, the bridge will never be seen. For you to unite the country must be with you. You must walk with them. And therefore, then, Murkomen will not feel that at some point during the journey towards the bridge, you're building a bridge while you're walking, you're making sure that you're breaking the back.
So
there's a concept about pulling the ladder. There's that concept of pulling the ladder, that you're pulling the ladder on everybody.
All right.
Murkomen believes that in the arrangement that they had in Jubilee, where Ruto was supposed to take after 10 years, it's being circumvented, circumlocuted, or circuited by Raila Odinga. In politics, anything goes. But the point is, when I was talking about my concern about his address, Uhuru's address is in April 2019. The report comes in between. Otiende Amolo says the person who gazetted this team is Uhuru. Now, when they finish, somewhere in the middle of this year, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to wait for the next address so that he brings the document?
Right.
How is the president then going to involve us? Because he can only involve parliament when he brings the document here. I would have, if I was sitting to advise, I would have told the president to wait until the Building Bridges Initiative completes, whether it's an interim report or any report, and bring it to the House for purposes of discussion. The discussion that Otiende Omolo is talking about is a legal discussion. It's not about succession. We will never discuss succession in the Building Bridges as to who is going to become president. No, that's not our business.
All right.
But we will discuss what are those issues in the 9 concepts they have drafted, that we can either make legislative changes, we can make constitutional changes, others are behavioral changes like corruption, those sort of things. How do we make progress?
Okay.
But more importantly, how are we going to build a bridge so that in 2022 we don't have the problem we had in 2017? The initial purpose is not for all time. We are not looking too much into the future. We are looking first at 2022. If the bridge does not get to 2022, then it's not a bridge. We are building something else.
Let me a little bit.
Really quick, because we need to get into the corruption.
I think we are in a
from what he said, from what he raised about, to be fair to,
that's true. I think we are in there's something very important that Mutula is raising. There is a conversation in the public that, we are not thinking about 2022. But the first test of whether or not we have built a united country is 2022.
Okay.
And no, you just complete that.
Yes.
If we are building a case for political disintegration, and rolling back, the processes that we are moving towards uniting the country, breaking political parties, breaking relationships that were there, creating political mistrust, it will be counterproductive for us to lie to ourselves that because of this period of lull, we haven't addressed the issues that made us deeply divided, that we will walk groping in the dark, hoping that we will never think about 2022, but then 2022 will sort itself, even though the signs, you can tell when it's about to rain. If you can see already that there's clouds, there's thunderstorms, you must be able to say, hey, wait a minute, we need to address these issues.
Okay, you made your point. Let him respond because you raised some issues there.
Senator Murkomen has spoken twice on this, surprisingly, and started by saying I answered my own question, which is very interesting. First of all, it should be remembered, and it might help Senator Murkomen to remember, that the handshake was an event. Just like the president said, there have been many handshakes subsequently. In fact, everyone has shaken everyone's hand. What is important is that that event then crystallized into the document and the initiative called the Building Bridges Initiative.
Yes.
And therefore, in discussion, in learned and serious discussion, we can't talk about the event. We must talk about the product of that event. And so, Senator Murkomen, if he wants to stay with the event, that's unfortunate because we all moved from there. We are now with the product of that event, which is BBI as gazetted.
Yes.
Now, on this one, I agree with Senator Mutula Kilonzo Jr., and I've said this before. There are 2 things that we learned when we were writing the Constitution. The first thing we learned is that If you want anything to be supported by Kenyans and to be carried by Kenyans, keep them along at every stage, so that they know what you are doing, how you are doing it, so that when you come to the conclusion, it does not look like a conclusion that is fished from some basket.
Yes.
The second thing is time. Everything can only happen if it's the right time. And if you lose that time, that constitutional moment, then you can't do it.
Okay.
And I'm afraid we might lose that. The last point is this. I had prodded Senator Murkomen, and I was hoping that he would actually finally tell us in this show why really they're opposed to the BBI, which is the product of the handshake.
Okay.
He hasn't. He has gone around everything else except say that. So I will now postulate as to possibly why they're uncomfortable. I suspect that Senator Murkomen and those with him are uncomfortable with the BBI, which is the product of the handshake, because they suddenly realize that we might actually fix some things that have been ailing us for some time, including illegitimate elections.
All right.
And if that is done, they fear the assured platform of their preferred presidential candidate is no longer assured. That is my suspicion.
All right.
Mark, I think we don't.
That's a suspicion.
Yeah,
That's a key word.
Actually,
Quick response. We need to get into
what
corruption.
Otieno Bonglo is trying to do is to just perpetuate what I told you earlier, that there is one side of the political divide that is suspecting, imagining,
Yes.
planning, profiling
Okay.
a certain side of the rest of Kenya to think that, in fact, from the day one, you would hear them, and most of the time ODM says there's a side that doesn't support BBI, there's a side that doesn't do this.
Yes.
I don't believe. I think it's politically dishonest for Otieno Molo to say the product of handshake was BBI. The product of handshake is broader, is bigger. It is politically bigger than BBI. BBI is just an entity, an institution there. A lot is happening and has been happening that is a product of that handshake. And even you, Masai, and anybody in this country to tell us that the only product of BBI is Senator Haji and Senator Amos Wako's work is not true. The reality is that a lot of political action is taking place among the things that are raised about what is going on in the country. And let me just add by saying that if you say these elements, the things that are beginning to emerge, is that the main conversation in this country related to handshake is that, if you hear everywhere, is that it's going to break Jubilee. And the conversation around the country now is that, Jubilee is broken because of this. You can't tell me that is the work of BBI as a secretariat or as an entity collecting views.
All right.
So I am saying this. President Uhuru Kenyatta, in his resolve and belief in uniting this country, has spoken fantastic today, and he has done so every day. But there is danger, the danger is in the relationship that he has with the person he has the relationship, because
Yes.
it threatens to roll back everything that has been done right for
really
this
quick.
country.
Your third bite, as you say, we don't want to be stuck up on this. We need to get into the issue.
Let me just, as Otieno Molo postulates, to say that although it appears, just from prima facie, just looking at it, as if the main person who is being attacked in the BBI or the initiative is Deputy President Ruto. The reality is that when you see him walking around, he says, I'm around, I'm going nowhere.
Okay.
He appears confident. So what is all this noise about? Because first and foremost, everybody appreciates that the level of political tension in 2017, 2018, and now it's sort of helped this country move forward.
Yes.
At the expense, of course, of looking as if all of us are one. There's no opposition. All of us go. We are everywhere. You don't know where everybody's going. The point is, I sometimes believe that the political machismo of the likes of Murkomen is to paint a picture of victim. I've just said the person who he appears to be under attack is very confident, but his foot soldiers appear to create victimization in it as just a way of, I think it's political machination, because as Otieno Molo says, if we lose this moment, assuming this is a moment where we need to sit as a country and build some consensus as to whether or not we need to achieve certain minimal things before the next general election, constitutional or otherwise, we might lose this moment.
Okay.
And in the losing of that moment, you will never find it again unless people fight. And that is what you want to avoid.
And let's not lose the opportunity to talk about something that he spent a good amount of time addressing, that is corruption. And part of what he said in this regard was that 7 current and former governors and over 30 CEOs of state corporations are under active investigation or prosecution for various corruption-related offenses. In several cases, banks and other institutions have been fined for breach of regulatory duty. Many people, as you say, were looking or waiting for blood or for heads to roll. That hasn't happened, but it did say something that some might say is quite telling, that if indeed a state official or public officer is arraigned, then they would be asked to step aside. And in this case, there's some concern as to how this is addressed. Well, we have the issue of, and you two have been going at it, Kimwarer and Aror Dam, Toake Dam, and the politicization of it all. But let's use that as an example. For instance, if someone is found culpable or is charged and asked to step aside, in your view as a senator and also as a legal mind, do you have concerns?
The only concern is for those people occupying executive positions. Insofar as the ones, chief officers, cabinet secretaries, it's automatic that they must leave office. The problem comes when you charge governors, deputy governors. Like in the case of Samburu, the entire government is in court. And then a court issues an order, like it issued in the case of Obado. Don't go to your office, don't step into your county, stay in another county. What is supposed to happen to that county?
Okay.
To the extent that you begin to wonder whether the courts sometimes are issuing orders that cannot be effected. The point you are making is this: if a governor is accused of corruption or an executive, in an executive position, goes back to the office, has been given the statement of witnesses. The witnesses are people who work under him. The documents are the ones in his office or departments under him. And he goes back to that office. What are the chances that that governor or that chief executive officer, or in the case of the National Land Commission, computers will not disappear, documents will not disappear, witnesses will not disappear or cow? Those are the concerns.
Yes.
So that while you are trying to address corruption and you are trying to make sure that you expedite these cases, there are some bottlenecks that we must as a country start thinking about. Otherwise, by the time it's 2022 and 26 governors are out of office, we will be looking for them in the Isle of Man, Cayman Islands, or some small little place that still has no name.
And in your submissions, at least in Senate yesterday, you said that this would bring a constitutional crisis in your view. This example, would you share the same?
It's an interesting subject. But Mark, let me start by saying what actually I understood the president to be saying about corruption.
Yes.
First, he acknowledged that we have a problem of corruption in all our institutions and basically in all the arms of government, which is true. Okay? And we need to acknowledge that. Yes. Secondly, I think he balanced the fears of Senator Murkomen and his groups, because a lot of them, and I will tell you why I think they celebrated. In Parliament, I saw those who celebrated, they feared that some people would be named and dropped today, and they feared that a substantial number might be their friends. So the president avoided doing that. But on the other hand, he also answered what they have been saying for some time. And there are two things. One, the allegation that the fight against corruption has been tribalized. He said that corruption has no religion, has no tribe, has no such thing. Secondly, there are attacks on some of the institutions that deal with corruption, the DCI, the DPP. He urged all of us to support those institutions. So he answered them, but also pacified them.
Yes.
And so let me address the question of that pacification. Is it true, as the president said, that he prefers to follow due process? And that if then you are charged, then you will be forced to leave office? The first statement about that, as Senator Mtula Kilonzo says, that can only apply to officers in the executive. So far, there's no legal framework to make any governors or any members of parliament leave office. Even as we speak, a number of our colleagues are in court.
Yes.
And there's no framework to make them leave. So it is restricted. That's number one.
Unless proven guilty.
Yes. Number two, that statement is not entirely consistent. and his speech writers need to examine this. When the president says that he wants to follow due process and therefore he cannot remove anybody from office until you are charged, but when you are charged, then you will be removed from office, that is not due process. Because the process of the law presumes you are innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
So if you then go that way, you will actually have to wait to the end.
Until they appeal.
But thirdly, and more importantly, and for me this is the most important thing, unfortunately I do not agree with the president that he cannot remove certain people from office, especially cabinet secretaries, principal secretaries, chief administrative secretaries, until they have been charged. Why? Because there a distinction must be drawn between integrity and accountability. Accountability is being accountable for your actions and omissions, and one of them is by being taken to court. You are taken to court as a criminal process to prove whether you are guilty of a crime or not. You are not taken to court to test your integrity. No. Integrity can be tested without you going to court. As a matter of fact, our intelligence agencies know a lot of things about a lot of people. They cannot prove them in court.
Okay.
But the president would have access to them. The point is, nothing stops the president from removing any CS, any PS, any CAS, even before they are taken
charged
to court.
Okay.
Because they serve at the discretion of the president. So the idea of saying there are certain people who he believes, and he himself has told us.
So is he playing safe, managing
He himself
the
has
situation?
told us that there's rot in the cabinet, which means he has the dossiers. He need not wait for them to be taken to court because the DPP is satisfied. Let that be a different process. Right now, the president can even decide to clear house or to remove some for reasons only he knows.
Okay.
So that is the one bit in which I do not agree.
So it's not just to be argued in the remits of the law. Your response, more comment to
first of all,
that statement.
I think as a nation, we must face the facts. Corruption is not a fiction; it's a fact that we are facing as a country. And the president today said that we can't fight corruption through corrupt means. In other words, that we must do everything to ensure that we deal with corruption, but we must follow due process of law. I like the way the president even went further to say that we must stop this vigilante justice mentality. Let me tell you something. Everybody, there's nothing new that the president talked about when he talked about rule of law. It is what everybody knows. Former Prime Minister, when he was told to step aside because of kazi kwa vijana, said that unless somebody is proven in court, I'm not going anywhere. Former Minister Mudavadi, when he was charged on the cemetery issue, even went ahead and said that he was mad with the EACC, the Anti-Corruption Commission, then for leaking information. Senator Orengo in court 2 weeks ago actually went even ahead of accusing the DCI of being a busybody, and talked about the need to protect people's reputation when even you are doing investigations. So what the president has said is not new. It's what he has always said from the beginning. Remember, Mark, that in 2012, opponents of the president and the deputy president went to court to bar them from standing for presidency because they were facing charges in ICC. And were it not for our strong constitution, President Uhuru Kenyatta would not be in office today. So it's not lost on him that rule of law is so important because there are people who can be victimized. Number two, the president has even gone public to argue that in 2015, he was made to issue names in parliament about senior government officials, including cabinet secretaries, who eventually have never been charged up to today.
Okay.
So it is important for us to say that we must fight corruption, but fight through the rule of law.
Yes,
now let me address something that Atiende has talked about. It's important. I mean, two people have raised the issues that I am supposed to respond to.
Really quick, because we also have the constitution of time here.
I have said, and I continue to emphasize, as long as DCI will carry out its responsibility in a manner that will show to the country that either is doing targeted, tribal, targeted investigations, either on projects because they are a certain region, or individuals who are holding office because they are associated to a certain person or certain tribe, we must call him out. And Kenyans must thank some of us who have the courage to call out the DCI, because it's not most of these members of parliament cannot, because if you have something in your closet that you fear the DCI will come for you, you will not be able to raise it.
Is it calling out the DCI or protecting your own, though?
No, we must call them out. And let me tell you something.
Is it just protecting your own, or is it calling out the DCI?
It is
you make it
calling
sound
out
like
the
it's on the
DCI,
national interest.
and I stand by that. And I stand by that, Mark.
Okay.
There is nothing to do with being on your own. The Deputy Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya, Umorengo, used the opportunity in court to call out the DCI. He's not from my tribe. And so the point we must talk as a nation, we must appreciate as a nation that if we don't build a country that is founded on rule of law, tomorrow when you are not in that position of authority, you'll not be able to stand out and live in a country that is based on freedom.
Right.
So I am glad that today the president has acknowledged what we all know, that we must fight corruption, but also that we cannot fight it like we are dealing with vigilante justice. We must use the rule of law.
Okay, probably you are, as he says, glad that no heads rolled, but that's what he said.
No, let me just point out on the rolling of ministers. Oh, sorry, I wanted to agree with my colleagues on something.
Yes.
The president does not need any consultation with anybody to fire a cabinet secretary or a PS or a chief administrative secretary. In fact, governors also don't need the permission of anybody to remove their CECs and so forth. What is only not possible in law, in the same case I talked about the president and deputy in 2012, is that the constitution says itself, unless someone is convicted, there's nothing you can do to them if they are elected.
All right, I'll be out of order because I'm out of time, but Mutula, really quick as we wrap this up.
Let me say that from a constitutional perspective, it appears a little untidy for the president to appear powerless as the chief executive officer of the country, because the constitution gives him immense powers to dismiss, and he actually dismissed the chaser without giving any reason. And what stops the president from removing and dismissing person X based on information that Otiende Amolo is talking about, and the X, that person is charged in court as a normal Kenyan, so that then there's no question of stepping aside, because we must get to a place in this country where integrity counts for something. Means where in the modern world, and we are attempting to become a modern world, somebody dies on a train and you're a cabinet secretary, you resign, yet you are not the driver of that train. It's about integrity. It's about taking political accountability. What the president did not address, he addressed legal responsibility, which in fact he doesn't need to come to parliament to tell us that he has to follow the rule of law or this and the other. Who takes political responsibility when a county is pilfered almost to the ground, and then you say, since I have not been convicted, I can continue running office?
Well, I'm sure, gentlemen, that everyone prays that we get to that point of integrity, because we are far from it. But gentlemen, sorry to cut you short. We have to end it here, but the